from SANEM and from the whole SANEM team, we are extremely grateful to our distinguished panelists and of course Professor Raihan to make their time and come here and attend this particular session and share their views with us. So here the purpose of my presentation, I call it a trigger presentation. It's not to give a full-blown presentation, but just to set the context or set the tone of the objective of this particular session. So you already know that the theme of our conference is governing new challenges, inclusive development, trade and finance. But here in this particular session, we'd like to have more South Asian perspective. So what I thought that when I make this trigger presentation, I highlight my points, emphasizing on these three keywords: inclusive development, trade and finance. Then I bring in another area which are not really discussed in much details, but which is very important, probably in describing these three elements too, which is kind of the politics of development. So I'll just end this, add that one perspective. So I'll go one by one, just to present to you, in front of you, the kind of thought process, what I have in my mind, and probably what I really expect from the distinguished panelists, Honorable Chief Guest, and of course Chair Dr. Nagesh Kumar, to reflect on some of these points. So here, if we focus on the inclusive development, the first point. So in South Asia, I think we are actually encountering the major problem in the area of growth, economic growth, the quantity versus quality, or whether there is any kind of conflict, or there's a dilemma. We are seeing this is one of the fastest growing regions in the world. But at the same time, when it comes to ensuring the quality of growth, I think there remains a big challenge. And how do you make the growth more qualitative? I think here I would like to definitely, we have to look at the drivers of growth. You know, what are the real drivers? In different South Asian countries, there are different aspects and different challenges. Probably from Bangladesh, so far we have been discussing on ready-made garments, we have been discussing on remittances and different other aspects. But I think for other South Asian countries also it's very important that getting understanding those drivers. Or also, I think fundamental question is whether the dividends from the existing drivers of growth are being reduced. So whether we need to look for new drivers. And here comes the fundamental question of the development paradigm. And now there is a big question or challenge the South Asian countries are facing, what we call the premature deindustrialization. So getting a high share of services sector, declining share of manufacturing, and how do you really get our things right in this context? Can we actually industrialize ourselves? And how do we do that? So then the next question is, of course, the employment. Again, the question is quantity versus quality. Especially, we are facing the challenges of employment generation, the number. In Bangladesh, Honorable Minister this morning referring to jobless growth. But I was one of the few people, writing on these kind of issues very recently. But other people, of course, they are writing. So, but this, of course, in terms of quantity, not big numbers we see in terms of employment generation. But at the same time, the problem is the quality of job also. It's a big challenge. And how do you, with a very high share of informal employment, with a very low share of decent job, I think this is a big challenge. Poverty and equality, I know these two topics are very close to Professor Sovan's heart, and then I really want him to reflect on these issues. How do you really address this challenge? So the very recent report comes with the finding that 50% of the world poor people live in 5 countries, and 2 of these 5 countries are from South Asia, India and Bangladesh. So this shows that actually, in terms of poverty, despite the fact that being a high-growing region, we have not been that successful. And inequality, definitely, in terms of endowment of the poor people, in terms of getting access to basic education and health, of course, quality and quality education and health, there remains a big challenge. And no doubt, with all these challenges, these all what I have been saying so far, these are not new, but these are kind of existing problems. Now the added challenges are how do you achieve SDGs by 2030? Do you really take the business as usual path, the way we have been doing? Or you need to take a different path, different approach. And in that case, the problem is the problem in setting up the priorities. Are we getting our priorities right? Are we actually emphasizing on the priorities which we need to address to actually achieve a larger part of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030? So in the case of trade, I thought that the global uncertain trade regime is, of course, very, very concern for us, especially with the trade war. And how do the South Asian countries respond to it? I hear from many Bangladesh, businessmen, and also some of them, they, the response, or even some of the policymakers, I think they respond by saying that we will gain from it. There is a, because China's tariffs will impose on China's, and there is a possibility that we'll gain out of it. But deeper analysis shows that the gains will be very, very short-lived. When you have a very trade war, this kind of uncertain trade regime, these are not really good for countries like Bangladesh, or even if we consider other countries in South Asia. So how do we respond to that? And I think this is something linked to the trade and investment policy the South Asian countries they have. Already they have. They have challenges. They did not get their trade and investment policies right. And that's when we compare this region with Southeast Asian countries or East Asian countries, we see marked differences in getting the trade and investment policies right. Future of regional integration in South Asia, we can talk a lot. Probably will not finish by, these 2 hours would not be enough on talking on this aspect. But it is true that, the recent trends are also alarming. You know that Pakistan did not give India the MFN status, most favored nation, after WTO was formed, which Pakistan was supposed to give, being a WTO member. And India, after a long time, I think yesterday, India also scrapped the MFN status for Pakistan. So how do you get these recent developments? We are not getting the SARC right. We are not getting the SAFTA moving. How do we get the regional integration in South Asia? And of course, this also puts a challenge of these countries' integration with the global and regional value chain. New trends in regional integration, Dr. Ganeshan Ugnaraja, he's excellent on that. He has been analyzing quite a lot on this mega FTAs. My hope would be that to hear from him some of these issues. China's BRI in South Asia's response. I think it's not only BRI, but also Chinese presence in South Asia. Probably, it's all over in South Asia. How do you see that? And how do you respond to that? And we have seen cases in Pakistan, we have seen cases in Sri Lanka, even in Africa. Can we handle this BRI, keeping in our national interest? Are we capable of doing that? So that is also a big concern. In terms of finance, I'll be quick. I think the major problem is financing development goals. Our honorable minister this morning, as well as Dr. Nagesh Kumar, both of them very rightly pointed out the very low tax GDP ratio in South Asia. Bangladesh, I think, one of the lowest in this region. Nepal has much higher tax GDP ratio than Bangladesh. But despite that, when you have this very big development agenda to put in place, increasing the expenditure of education, public education from 2% to 4 to 5%, health expenditure less than 1% to 3 to 4%, social protection to 4 to 5%, how do you really do that with very low tax GDP ratio? I think this is a big challenge now. And another challenge is added, like in the SDGs, the emphasis is on how you have to mobilize resources domestically because the foreign source is getting limited. And with all this, I think the major problem is the weak state capacity in mobilizing revenue. And of course, weak state capacity in implementing different tax reforms. So are these scenarios, really they encourage us? How do we do the breakthrough? I think here comes the major challenge of the politics of development. If we want to do the breakthrough, can we have a breakthrough from the business as usual scenario? So there are some issues of whether the South Asian countries are having some elements of developmental state. We can see there are some, like some countries, they emphasize on poverty alleviation, emphasis on health and education, on social protection. When it comes to putting those things together in a more holistic way, I think there is a big challenge when you compare these countries with the Southeast Asian or East Asian countries. There are weak institutions in these countries. It's a very common. Probably some countries are a little bit ahead, some countries are far behind. But there are also some pockets of functioning institutions. For example, in a country like Bangladesh, when at the business environment, the doing business indicators, you are at the bottom of the list ranking, you are doing very good at the ready-made garments. How do you do that? Probably you have been able to create some pockets of functioning institutions. Can we replicate those functioning institutions to other cases? So there we need to understand the formal, informal institutions, their linkages, and probably the final point, which is very sensitive, but probably we need to also talk there. We need to have a much larger discussion that whether democracy and development, are they complementing each other or they are against each other? Can we get those things together or no? Thank you very much with your very kind attention.